We came for them, but we were too late. 11th of April, 1945. Unknown soldiers of the Third Army of the United States of America.
11th of April, 1945. Early in the morning, the sky over Thuringia was pale and stern. The wind tore dry dust from the fields and carried with it the scent of thawing earth. A column of American vehicles moved in order beneath white stars on their hoods, jeeps, trucks, armored cars, followed by infantry. A simple and unequivocal order came down: secure the sector around Ettersberg Hill and inspect the Buchenwald camp located there, one of the largest concentration camps on German territory, situated near the city of Weimar in the state of Thuringia. Elements of the 6th Armored Division of the United States, operating as part of the Third Army under General George Patton, were in the lead. Commanders gave short, precise instructions, measured and without unnecessary words. The matter required speed, and the column moved forward. The climb along the country road ended abruptly. A clearing opened, and on it rows of barracks, barbed wire, and guard towers stood in strict lines. A metal plate with lettering hung over the gate, a sign that would soon become one of the world's most remembered symbols. The first reactions were far from rhetorical. The officers' immediate concerns were practical: secure the perimeter, post guards, and get medical teams in. But within a few steps, it became clear this place had not merely been abandoned. It held the traces of the systematic destruction of human life. The entrance to Buchenwald revealed a panorama of evidence: piles of clothing and shoes on the paths, mixed suitcases and personal effects, all the things that had once belonged to people with names and histories. In these objects, the memory of former lives was preserved, and every discovered portrait or a child's garment struck as proof people had lived here. Medics went first, followed by sanitation teams and photographers. Everything took place in a mode of immediate triage because time decided fates. In the barracks and on the grounds, they encountered those who still breathed and those who could no longer raise their heads. Survivors appeared as if their bodies had been squeezed down to a thin shell, skin pulled tight over bone, movements slow and barely purposeful, eyes heavy from hunger and disease. Their voices were whispers. Sometimes single names were called with hope. The medics set about triage at once: who needed urgent evacuation, who could wait, who could not be saved. The simplest actions, water, food, a warm blanket, contained the first hope that some might yet survive. American soldiers, hardened by battle, stood stunned. On the battlefield, death is a mechanical act accompanied by explosions and noise. Here, death was deliberate and methodical. It was the result of schedules and orders, bureaucratic precision, and human callousness. On the siding tracts beside the camp, they found rail cars, death trains that had brought people in conditions incompatible with life. Near the cars lay tiny children's shoes and torn scraps of correspondence. Each found object, a toy, a portrait, a letter, became both proof and parable of how human dignity had been destroyed. Not an hour after entering, tension shifted into action. In the sector where guards had fled, many former prisoners already showed an indomitable will to act. Before the arrival of regular troops, they had tried to restore some order. They raised flags, guarded storerooms, and tried to distribute water. Some of the guards had abandoned their posts, others had been seized by inmates. This moment, the uprising of people pushed past their limit, would later be seen as both contentious and dramatic. Who had truly liberated Buchenwald, the troops or the prisoners themselves? But the fact remained, by the time Americans arrived, the prisoners had already taken certain initiatives into their own hands.
The American response was layered and ambivalent.
On one hand, there was the demand for order and discipline. Officers issued orders to arrest those who wore the guards' uniforms, to document the facts, and to preserve evidence. On the other hand, there was human weakness and rage, which sometimes surfaced as summary justice. There were cases in which liberated prisoners, consumed by grief and fury, found weapons against those who had worn the executioner's uniform. There were also episodes when soldiers, shaken by what they had seen, lost self-control. Command recognized the danger of such vigilante justice. Allowing mob retribution would undermine discipline and the prospects for lawful punishment. That is why orders to detain suspects and thoroughly document events went hand in hand with the need to restrain emotional outbreaks. At the same time, work continued that would not appear in the dramatic opening footage. Evidence was being gathered, barracks photographed, lists of arriving transports recorded. Investigators and military lawyers worked alongside medics, inventories of belongings, photographing documents, taking survivor statements, all of it necessary to later prove responsibility and bring the guilty to justice. The photographs taken in those first days would become an integral part of tribunal materials and of the international record. The medical mission was immediate and unrelenting. A field hospital was set up directly at the camp. Surgeons operated, nurses changed dressings and prepared transfusions where possible. Reports came in of typhus outbreaks, mass starvation, and infections. Doctors fought not only wounds but epidemics that threatened to take still more lives. Supplies of food and medicine arrived by convoy, but logistics were difficult. Roads had been damaged, lines of communication were burdened, and the rescue effort stretched over days and weeks. Medical and sanitation detachments worked without rest, yet mortality in the first days after liberation remained high. Many were too weakened to survive even life-saving interventions. A particularly significant moment in the events was the demonstration for the local population. Command, understanding that silence and denial among nearby communities could breed excuses, ordered citizens of Weimar and surrounding towns to be brought to the camp so they might see the results for themselves. These tours, forced and brutal, aimed to make local people face the facts and remove any pretense of ignorance. Such actions later provoked debates about morality and effectiveness, but at the time they answered a simple need: to make the truth visible and to force communal responsibility. Equally important was the act of bearing witness. Journalists and reporters who arrived in the days that followed recorded survivors' stories, names, fates, dates. These personal testimonies became part of collective knowledge and helped the world understand that behind the numbers, hundreds, thousands, there were specific human beings. Many soldiers present at the liberation later recalled holding small items in their hands, a letter, a photograph, a badge, and realizing that such fragments spoke more loudly than any speech. Also evident in those early days was the administrative madness of the crime. There were lists, plans, routine forms, stamps and papers that reflected schedules for supplies, the movement of people, even bureaucratic phrasing. This combination, bureaucratic neatness and monstrous intent, made the crime especially horrific. The machinery of destruction had functioned like clockwork. For military investigators, these papers were invaluable. From them, they could reconstruct chronology and hold those who issued orders accountable. There were, of course, human stories that could not be squeezed into official reports. One senior sergeant recalled with sorrow finding a locket with a name in a pile of belongings. He wrote the name down and promised to return it to the list of the remembered. Another soldier found a child's sweater and quietly put it into his pocket, intending to buy bread for the child if it survived.
These small gestures could not change the larger picture, but they helped restore a face to people in a world that had tried to erase their identities.
Judicial processing of the crimes began immediately. Officers filed reports, sent dispatches to headquarters, and prepared the grounds for international prosecution. Those first documents would form the foundation of future tribunals and be used in post-war processes. Documentation was not merely a legal formality, it was also a moral act, an acknowledgement of what had happened and a demand for remembrance. A few days after Buchenwald was discovered, the camp was transformed into a site of rescue and investigation. Tent hospitals were erected, registration points for survivors established, and supply depots set up. Medical trains evacuated the most seriously ill to larger hospitals. Sanitary reports recorded a gradual decline in mortality as aid arrived. The work was urgent and continuous. Additional forces arrived and reporters carried the first accounts out to the world. The psychological impact of Buchenwald's liberation on American soldiers and officers was deep and long-lasting. Many later stated that the event divided their lives into before and after. Their perception of the war changed. They had seen not only combat and destruction, but also systemic state-organized crime. This knowledge left marks on their memories, on letters home, and in public testimonies that became part of historical memory. Time passed, and formal processes, inquiries, trials, publications began to synthesize facts and pass judgment. Much of this work was heavy and imperfect. Evidence was fragmentary. Some defendants claimed they were only following orders. Others portrayed themselves as minor functionaries without real authority. Nevertheless, hundreds of people involved in managing the system were held accountable. Public scrutiny, photographs, and the records produced in those first days were the principal basis for justice. When the column that had gathered on a Thuringian hill moved back down the same road, the wind again raised dust, but now against a different backdrop. In truck beds there were not only medical supplies and food, there were documents, collected belongings, and lists of names. The soldiers knew that their duty had not ended when they left the site. It had only begun in courtrooms, in archives, and in letters that would be sent to descendants. Buchenwald became not only a place of liberation, it became a monument and a lesson for humankind. Its memory must serve as warning and a demand for justice. If one attempts to sum up what American soldiers saw at Buchenwald in a single sentence, it is a simple and terrible thought. Here was proof that human dignity can be intentionally and systematically destroyed. Yet they also saw another truth: human resistance, the solidarity of prisoners, last acts of help between the emaciated and those who, at risk to themselves, shared bread and water. It is in this contradiction between devastation and enduring humanity that the lesson of those April days of 1945 lies. The world must remember, and it must answer.